Oh, whoa. Okay, oh God. I'm gonna get this out of the greenhouse. Hi folks, and welcome to my 2024 peat-free compost trials. Today we're going to be trying out 4 different peat-free composts. Part 1 is going to be kind of first impressions, and then part 2, which is in this video, timestamps, a link below if you want to skip ahead. Part 2 is going to be seeing how all of the seeds that I plant in these have germinated and how they've started growing. I, like many other growers this year, have had a pretty tricky start to our growing season. I've mostly been growing in Sylvagrow compost. This is one I trust and have had really good experiences with. And I'm very interested to see if there's going to be any dramatic differences between all of these peat-free composts. The ones that we've got today, a few I should say were sent to me by the companies for free, but I'm going to be doing completely honest reviews and impressions. We've got some from Dalefoot. They don't do an all-purpose or a multi-purpose one. This one is specifically for tomatoes, so I'm going to be planting some tomatoes in there, see how they go. I've got another one in the polytunnel, which is for salads and more like vegetables. This one, I think a relatively new company, Heart of Eden. Once again, these are all peat-free. One of the things we're going to be looking at, first impressions, kind of texture, how it feels, but also how much information there is about what goes into it. This is something that's always frustrated me a little bit, and one of the things I quite like about Sylvagrow. They're very honest about their recipe. I don't like it when you can't tell what has gone into a compost. This Heart of Eden one, I think, is quite a new compost on the market. And then over here, we've got the slightly cheaper option. The Sylvagrow, the Heart of Eden, and the Dalefoot, they're all slightly pricey composts. I'll put some details up around me, but I think you can expect to pay around £8 to £10 a bag. This was £5 a bag. I saw this just in Homebase, just some off-the-shelf peat-free. This is going to be kind of a control to see, is it worth spending a little bit extra on the quote-unquote premium peat-free composts? And let's start off just opening these bags, see how they look and see how they feel. I said there were 4. I was actually wrong. I forgot about this one, which is very intriguing and a little bit different. This is Coco Coir compost. Now, Coco Coir you can tend to buy as kind of an ingredient for potting mix. It's like the husks. It's from a byproduct of the coconut industry. And it's got kind of crazy water retention. This is a tiny thin little block, and once you hydrate it, it expands and it balloons. But this is a bit different from Coco Coir. It says that it's a compost. You can use it as you would a compost, and it feeds plants for up to 6 months. This has been hanging around in the polytunnel for a little while, which is why it looks a little sun-stained. But I'm going to be trying this one as well for the seedlings. Slightly warm today. So I'm going to get straight into it. First impressions. The first one that I've got on this potting table behind me is Sylvagrow. And for me, this is kind of like the gold standard. To look at it, it does look a little bit, sometimes it looks a little bit kind of chunky. You see a little bit of the bark chips and the wood chips that look a little bit not great. And quite often, if you've got a seed tray like this and you're top watering, what you quite often do is wash down the fine particles, and then on the top you see all the slightly rougher, slightly bigger stuff. And I think that can just be a little bit deceptive. For me, there's nothing quite as soft and pillowy and nice as Sylvagrow that I've experienced to date. But what I'm going to be doing for the testing, 1 tray like this for each of the compost. So we've got 4 here, I'll find another one. And we're going to do a series of things, all the same seed. We're going to put them in the same place in either one of the greenhouses or the polytunnels, try and make it as fair as possible. But my first impressions of Sylvagrow are really good. And they're really very transparent about their formula, their ingredients, what goes in. We went on a factory tour, I'll link that video below if you want to see it. I think they're probably a lot more transparent than a lot of other places. And one of the things they boast about is having a same kind of consistent formula and recipe for every bag of Sylvagrow. The next one to look at is this Dalefoot wool-based compost. This isn't the one for tomatoes. This is the green one for vegetables. Got some pictures, roots, herbs, brassicas, salad. And one of the things that Dalefoot really boast about is that you don't need to feed. I think, I might be wrong, but I think they're kind of against using artificial fertilizer. They're very big on their kind of environmental credentials. One of the very cool things about Dalefoot is that they do fund kind of peatland restoration, habitat restoration. Very, very cool. They're big on kind of soil association approved and organic growing. I don't know what they say about their ingredients though. They talk about added comfrey for the feed. They talk about bracken And the fact that he uses bracken is quite cool. Again, for the environmental credentials, bracken is quite invasive in a lot of habitats. I live quite close to the New Forest, and a lot of places are trying to get rid of invasive bracken, and finding like a economical use for it is very cool. And then we've got the wool element, of course, as well. And once again, finding an economic use for that is quite beneficial. I'm not sure exactly how much you can find about their recipes or what goes into it. I'll probably be flashing some notes on screen up here. But generally, first impressions of this stuff, they do a lot of cool things. Let's see how it feels. Oh, it's quite nice actually. I must say as well, for all of these, I'm just going to be using the neat compost, nothing added, no mycorrhizal fungi, no added pelleted fertilizer or blood, fish and bone, no liquid feed. It's all going to be just what's in the bag. I will say this wool compost, it looks, I don't know what I was expecting, but it looks like green waste compost. It looks like black gold. Really, really nice texture to this. Very impressed by the kind of light feel. There is a little bit of a kind of twiggy thing going on, and I think that is the bracken, but not really different from Sylvagrow in that regard. It feels lovely and soft and pillowy. It feels like coir almost. It feels very much like Sylvagrow, which I'm quite surprised by. There is a little bit of clumping, one or two, but nothing crazy. I really like it when you can take something out of a bag and get it straight into a module without having to worry about sieving it or breaking up clumps or any of that kind of thing. You can definitely do that with this Dalefoot. Definitely one or two slightly bigger twigs, but I don't think that's an issue. I'm really kind of bowled over by this just dark, rich colour. It looks like I say, black gold is the best term for it. It looks more like that really good quality homemade compost you get than maybe anything I've seen out of a bag, peat free. Next up, wow. The Heart of Eden. Now, these things are heavy, and one of the reasons for that is I think this is a slightly bigger bag. Oh, good Lord. This is a 50-litre bag. Most of the bags nowadays have gone down to 40 litres for this kind of compost, so that's a slight plus for the Heart of Eden, I guess. Nothing too exceptional, although interestingly there is a picture of chili peppers. I should say I have planted a few things into this. This is a little tray of flowers, and they were really struggling in my Sylvagrow, so I planted these before I could start recording, and so far they're all looking happy. They've been in here maybe kind of 4 or 5 days. That does mean I've had my first impressions of working with this already, and I must say nowhere near as pleasant as Sylvagrow or Dalefoot. Let's have a look on the back now and see if there's anything on here about ingredients or where it's sourced from. What goes into this compost? I don't know. There is not much on here about sourcing. Now, there might be a load more stuff online, so I will have a look, and like I say, probably flashing up some notes. All of this on the back here really is about instructions for, you know, potting on, sowing seeds. We've got one little bit here on it being free from peat, and it kind of guaranteeing the first kind of 5 to 6 weeks worth of nutrition for your plant. Very different from Dalefoot, which says it will carry your plant right through to the end of its growing season. Now, I don't want to move this again. Okay. Actually, the reason that this thing is so heavy is that it's wet. And I don't know why. I mean, I have stored all of these in exactly the same way as well, I should say. As soon as they arrived at my house, I got them undercover in my shed first and then into the polytunnel. So they all should be the same, and I think this one is maybe just quite wet. The Heart of Eden stuff, though, does feel dramatically different. I don't think it's just because it's wet either. It is much clumpier, much more, it looks like kind of raw grass or something like that is in here. Lots of much bigger twigs. This is the sort of thing, it might be okay, but you kind of look at this and think, oh, maybe I should run that through a sieve, especially if you're doing something like fine seeds. Let me show you a little bit closer. Now, I wouldn't say it looks awful by any means, but it is markedly different to the other ones that we've looked at so far. Just lots of big kind of bits of grass. Now, like I say, there's not much on the back about what exactly goes into this, but looking at it, it looks like a lot of kind of green waste. I just kind of run my hands through. A lot more of these just bigger clumps that, I mean, they do break up when you give them a squeeze, but this just looks rougher. You know, it doesn't look very fine textured. And I'm guessing if I put this through a riddle, there's going to be quite a lot of kind of chunks left at the top. Yes, you see, obviously I've not done this with the other compost, but I know if I did, you wouldn't get this kind of stuff rising to the top. Of course, this is just first impression, so although it might look a little bit more rough, could well be amazing quality, it could be full of nutrition. But in the interest of fairness, I'm not gonna sieve this. If I was using it just for the first time and I'd opened this bag, I would be sieving it. But we're gonna be doing a mix of seeds and I want this to be fair. So I said at the start, the idea would be open the bag, get the compost into these seed modules and then get seeds into them. So I think that's what I should do. Because it's quite loose, I am gonna do a lot more kind of dibbing, making sure that that air is really pushed out, because when you get a loose mixture like this that doesn't have many fines, it's really easy to end up with some big air gaps. And I can see straight away when I dib this, it is going down by half compared to the other ones that I've done already. I have used the same dibber on all of these, I will say, but this is going down much more. All of that air is kind of compressing out. I can really tell that this is only about half full. I really hope I can find some more information about the ingredients that goes into the Heart of Eden one. Next one. This is, I'm hoping this is going to be the stand-in for just the sort of thing that you pick up at the supermarket. You know, the Asda, the Homebase, the B&Q, cheap 4 or 5 quid a bag peat-free compost. I mean, that's not, I remember when this was 2 or 3 quid. This is a 40 litre bag. I'm guessing we're going to have very little information on here about where it's from. Absolutely nothing. What is interesting though, and slightly concerning, there's no instructions on here for potting on, which kind of suggests that actually this isn't designed to be used for potting up and potting and sowing seeds into. The only instruction on here is for improving soil structure, fertility, mulching. Yeah, everyday use, mixing into beds, borders, and mulching. I actually think that that is mis-selling, to be honest. To sell this with peat-free garden compost in big letters at the top, you expect when you buy compost to be able to plant seedlings straight into it. So we're going to try it, we're going to see. I did notice that they are a member of the Responsible Media Growing Association, as are Heart of Eden. I didn't see that on the Dalefoot, but that is a kind of sustainability tracking thing that I learned a lot about when we went to Melcourt. And I talk about that quite a lot in that Melcourt video. Oh, whoa. Okay, oh God. I'm gonna get this out of the greenhouse. I've never seen so many fungus gnats in my life. Uncertain how well these are going to come across on camera, but I opened this and it was actually swarming with them. They exploded out. You can see them kind of running across the surface. I've never seen so many fungus gnats. Now, to be completely fair to Homebase, I have had fungus gnats kicking around in the spent compost, in the polytunnel, where that has been stored. Compost bags do have holes, so it's possible when I bought that from the store, probably about 8 weeks ago, they might have been completely clean, but I've never opened a bag and seen that many just go before. That was a little bit like, ooh, it's giving me the heebie-jeebies. So I'm going to kind of shake it out, let them fly out a little bit more, and then pot up. They're going to be in the greenhouse. I mean, there's going to be lots of larvae in the compost. But generally, once you get into sort of proper summer outdoors, I find fungus gnats aren't too much of a problem. But if you were using that in January to start your growing season indoors, then you might end up like I had, because I used some old compost at the start of my season and we've had real problems in the house, you know, just becoming swarmed with fungus gnats. So they can do a little bit of damage to your plants, but generally not something to be, you know, you wouldn't necessarily need to take that back to the store and be complaining and demanding your money back. First impressions, a good colour on this. One thing I kind of have come to expect quite often with a cheap peat-free compost is you kind of buy a load of uncomposted grass. Quite often you can open a bag and it just looks like someone's cut the grass, raked it up, left it for 2 weeks, and then put it in a bag, and it doesn't look too good. This does look like semi-decent green waste compost. I can see a few of the fungus gnat larvae as well, tiny little white wormies. It's definitely not fine. You can pick it up in blocks like this, so it's quite kind of compressed. Definitely, like the Heart of Eden, needs a bit of working first. This feels very hard. It feels a little bit like it might have gone into the bag too hot and it's kind of composted and got hot in the bag. They take on quite a hard, like a kind of almost crispy texture. Even though this is quite wet, I can feel the moisture. It also feels kind of like slightly sharp, slightly hard. And then again, once you kind of work it and break all this up, it doesn't feel too bad. Now, fungus gnats and clumping aside, I am pleased to see there's nothing really horrible in here that I found just yet. Oh, there we go. That is the first bit of plastic. Generally speaking, something like this, something a bit cheap from the supermarket, is going to have come from a council municipal tip, where you've just got people chucking anything and everything in their green waste, so you get bits of plastic. There's another tiny bit there. I've seen people find metal things that kind of go through. If you got stainless steel, it doesn't get picked up by the magnets sometimes, so you find things like forks and utensils and cutlery in your bag of compost, which is not what you want to be paying for. There's a few slightly bigger twiggy bits, but generally, I've got to be honest, for something like a cheap bag of compost, this doesn't look too bad. A couple of bits of plastic, another tiny little bit there, couple of stones, literally 2 stones in these first scoops. Could be much worse. Once again, I think if I'd bought this, I would be sieving it, but in the interest of fair testing, we're just going to get this straight in. I have broken it up quite a bit with my hands, so not too much work, like getting a sieve out or anything like that, but I've done a little bit. I will say today, if you're enjoying today's video and this quite in-depth kind of first look and first impressions, please do have a little think about sharing it. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe below. I don't often ask for that, but a video like this takes an awful long time to prepare and edit and set up and get ready and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to share it in like Facebook gardening groups or that kind of thing with people who you think might be interested, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. One thing I will say, it doesn't smell great. It doesn't smell awful, but you shouldn't really have any kind of unpleasant smell coming from your compost. It should be, check this, Dalefoot. That is completely odorless, ever so slightly earthy, slightly sweet, but generally it's quite a nice smell. And that's what good compost is like. This stuff just smells a little off, a little chemically, a little thick, you know? But you get what you pay for, I think. The last one is this coir block, which I must admit I'm quite skeptical about. When I saw this and I saw that it's meant to feed your plants for up to 6 months and it's coir, I just thought that is really, really unusual. Normally coir is inert, so they must, you know, inject this or what do they do? Impart, that's the word I was looking for, this with some kind of fertilizer. And it does say it contains controlled release NPK fertilizer, but it does come with this bag which you fill with a litre of warm water. So we'll just sit for 5 minutes, it says, to let this hydrate. I think I did a little bit too much water. I wasn't very scientific with that. Whoop. Oh wow, yes, I can see the fertilizer, okay. You can see there's like bright green kind of little blocks of fertilizer that have been put in here. They don't look very mixed in just yet, but I'll mix them in. It says break up and stir to create a light open mixture. I was expecting, I had it kind of prepped, I was going to say, well, what does it feel like? It feels like coir, but actually it doesn't feel like coir. It feels overly wet and gritty because I think I've added too much water. But the fact that it's both overly wet and not expanded is a bit of a confusing one for me. I'm not sure what's gone on here. I can see as well, actually, it looks like the fertilizer is quite kind of clumped together. So I'm going to give this a really good mix because I don't want all of the fertilizer to be in like 2 of the cells. Feels very unusual filling a seed cell with coir, not something I've ever done before. You do use coir. It's really good for growing microgreens and that kind of thing. And it is a key ingredient in Sylvagrow. Definitely a strange one to work with, but I'm going to get them all sown and we're going to look at how these are looking in a few weeks' time. Well folks, welcome back to the plot. It's a gorgeous day. I've been working away, so excuse me if I look a little hot, a little warm, but it's time to check on the seedlings. I will put on the screen up here how long it's been exactly because I can't remember the exact number, but we've had some fascinating results. Now, for this to be a true, blind test, I would have had to not label these with the brand name on the labels, but I have done that, and so it's not exactly scientific or conclusive. I'll look at all of the trays closely, but the result that has really stood out as the shocker is the Dalefoot. Now, when I saw this, I actually got in touch with the company and said, hey, what's going on here? Because, my seeds next door have germinated fantastically, but the Dalefoot just very, very poor germination. And I can see a few have kind of started and then died off. You know, compare that even to that Homebase one, which I was really unimpressed with. And we've got pretty decent germination. Now the company were really good, and basically they held their hands up and said, look, our compost is not suitable for seedlings. And I said, well, maybe you should write that on the bag. I wasn't sassy. That sounded a lot sassier than I meant it to. And then I checked the bag, and sure enough, it says, this compost is not suitable for seedlings. And they said it's basically because it's too moisture retentive. So more mature plants can cope with that because their roots can absorb all that moisture and they can transpire it and use it. But seedlings tend to have a lot of trouble, and actually quite often they will rot. So they sell a specialist seed sowing compost. Now I imagine you could probably just mix that with something like vermiculite perlite, maybe a bit of coir, although that's quite retentive. So I don't know, but I'm sure you could mix it with some other stuff, maybe composted wood fines or something like that, or just, you know, 50-50 with another compost that you've got lying around. But I was really shocked and a little bit concerned, because it really is just those radish which have germinated and not much else. Now I must admit, there's so many surprising things to talk about. I think the one that is doing best is this one up here, the coir. Now I really didn't expect this, you know, full hand on my heart. I thought this was going to be a bit rubbish, to be completely honest with you. I wasn't expecting much from coir at all, because coir is inert, it's not got much life in it, you know, that it's not going to have the same kind of microbiology and microbiome that you can get in a compost. But they're just miles ahead up here. Still very early days, but I'm very interested to see how all of these go to maturity. I would like to actually keep some of these crops and plant them out, because it seems like a waste not to, but there is part of me that just wants to leave them in the cells for as long as possible. So I might plant half out, see how they do, and keep the rest just in the cells to really see how much nutrition is in that compost, which one is going to go the longest before it really starts to either bolt or just look absolutely nutrient deprived. Well folks, it's currently the 29th of May, and I think this has been running long enough that we've got some conclusive enough results to have, you know, I'm confident enough to say that we have some winners and we have some losers at this point. I have absolutely loved seeing these results, and they have really surprised me, actually. The first and most surprising we have already looked at in depth. That is the Dalefoot. We had absolutely shocking germination and realised that this compost is not recommended for seedlings. What has surprised me, actually, this is still very dark. It looks moist. I would not have watered this. I would have thought that it didn't need any water. The main issue here is water retention. That is why these seeds have rotted instead of germinating. And actually, I've picked this up. It's incredibly light. The seedlings are starting to wilt. There's just a few lettuce in here. So a very, very tricky compost. I have also been running a tomato trial outside of these trays, and we will come on to that because I've been using Dalefoot there as well. Next one. So this one is the Homebase compost. Homebase peat-free. I was pleasantly surprised by a lack of plastic and that kind of stuff. There was a little bit. But one other thing that has pleasantly surprised me actually is very little weed growth. But in terms of the seedling performance, we've got tomatoes here that are just starting to get their first leaves. Basil just getting first leaves, pretty frail, pretty miserable. Oh, this one's germinated. Lettuce a bit pallid, a little bit sad, and some of the radish looking okay. But overall, this isn't great. We've got decent enough germination, which is good, but there's clearly not much goodness available to these seedlings in the compost. And I can tell that because if you look at some of the other ones, like the Heart of Eden that we have here, you can hopefully see that these plants are much further along. The tomatoes actually look very similar to that Homebase, and these ones don't look too great, but the lettuce and the basil much further along, looking much stronger. The radish too, not looking amazing to be honest, but decent enough. It's a little bit of a shame that the parsley has been incredibly slow to germinate on all of these, but I do think it can be a bit like that. So can't really blame that on the compost. But Heart of Eden moving in the right direction. You might notice a pattern, each of these trays getting slightly better. The last two I think are pretty neck and neck, and these are the ones that really surprised me. First up, we have the Sylvagrow. Now the first thing to note is just how much more advanced the tomatoes are on these. These have got their first tree leaves that are really nice and bushy, and the second and sometimes the third sets of tree leaves just starting to come out. What has surprised me about the Sylvagrow, and this is not what I was expecting at all, but this is the only one that actually has a little bit of weed seed. We have a little bit of fat hen here, this one, very common allotment weed. We have a little bit of grass, and as well I have a little bit of oxalis. Now generally I always think of Sylvagrow as pretty much completely weed free because of their composting process. Tomatoes really good, rocket a little bit better than the rest, basil a little bit better than the rest, salad looking really healthy, the lettuce here looking really good, but the star of the show here, the radish, apparently adores Sylvagrow. These are absolutely gigantic, looking really healthy. But then finally, the one that has surprised me the most, and I think is definitely the best, is this fortified Coco Coir. Really shocked by this, and unfortunately I have noticed this is a little bit underwatered. I will say this is very tricky to water. It behaves differently from compost. It's one you've got to probably get a little bit used to, but that's not its fault. It's the same with if you're used to peat-based compost going to peat-free. There's a few things that you've got to get used to, and this does seem a little bit tricky. We've got one parsley germinated in here, so the parsley germination was the same throughout, but tomatoes amazing. The rocket actually not as good as some of the others, but the basil, the lettuce, absolutely amazing, and the radish I think would be better, but I think this is user error that I've let it dry out a little bit too much. So really I did not expect this to work. This one has blown me away. This really has surprised me. So folks, we've seen how the Dalefoot vegetable compost went not particularly well, but I did in tandem run a tomato test because I had that bag of Dalefoot tomato compost, and I really thought this was going to be sublime stuff. So I've done 2 tomato tests as well. And the first here has been running for about a month, and you can immediately see there's 2 very different trays of tomatoes here. These are all exactly the same variety of tomato, and they were planted into 2 different composts at the same time. I actually had about 30 seeds in each cell, so I had about 60 tiny little seedlings, and I planted one on into Sylvagrow and one on into the Dalefoot tomato compost. And I must admit, I am disappointed to tell you that this is the Dalefoot compost and this is the Sylvagrow compost, and you can see an absolutely just shocking difference between these two. I've been thinking for a little while if I've done anything wrong with the Dalefoot compost, and if there's anything, it might have been that I slightly overwatered. I gave them the same amount of water. I was quite careful to do that, but it is possible that this is just much more moisture retentive, whereas the Sylvagrow is a little bit more free draining. The size difference is just remarkable, isn't it? I mean, it just speaks for itself. The Sylvagrow ones are absolutely dwarfing it. So that was the first test, and the second over here has not been running long enough to be particularly conclusive, but I planted loads over here in Sylvagrow, relatively decent growth in the Sylvagrow, but this Dalefoot one over here, so these were planted at the same time, these 2 trays, and I did a few more in Dalefoot just to see. And I must say, if anything, these are looking maybe ever so slightly, they've got an edge on those Sylvagrow ones. All of these have come from seed modules and seed cells, so these are all a bit different stages of growth and that kind of thing. So a little harder to draw conclusions, but these ones were all exactly the same, just tiny little seedlings when they were planted in. So I must admit, first impressions of the Dalefoot tomato compost, not too impressive. Down here we've got another mega tray. You can see I've grown a lot of tomatoes this year, and this one is all Sylvagrow again. So this is kind of the stuff that I would normally use, and they're looking really good. I think I would be kind of happy enough using the Coco Coir, the Sylvagrow, or the Heart of Eden. They are all quite expensive composts. You know, all of these are quite premium peat-free trials, apart from our Homebase peat-free compost. Although this is called compost on the bag, it does say not to use with seedlings, which I do think is a bit of a scam. Dalefoot say the same thing, to be fair, but I would say that Dalefoot was a bit more of a user error. I think if you're getting a specialist compost like Dalefoot, You're probably going to read a little bit more about it, especially when you're paying for the cost of something like this, than you would be if you just go into Homebase. You know, you're just a punter off the street and you think, yeah, I need some compost, and you pick it up. I really do think it's quite badly marketed to have something sold as compost when what you're actually selling as Homebase is a peat-free mulch or soil improver. So I would be very unhappy if I had bought this and used this for seedlings. Pretty slow growth. What has been nice and pleasantly reassuring is the performance of Sylvagrow. Had lots and lots of comments about Sylvagrow this year. People sort of trying it for the first time, maybe not having the best results, but I think maybe a lot of those people, it's their first time going peat-free. But I'm still fairly confident saying that Sylvagrow is one of the best peat-free composts on the market, and I will continue to use Sylvagrow as my main thing, just because I rate its consistency. Yeah, there were 1 or 2 weed seeds in here that had germinated and got away. It's quite unusual though, but it's not a major issue. If there were weeds all over it, then that is really, really bad, because when you're sowing direct into a module, especially if you're a beginner, it can be tricky to tell what is a weed and what is your seed. But there we go. That is my compost trial. I'm happy calling it to a close now. I'm going to leave these in the cells, so tune in to future tours if you want to see which of these is going to run out of nutrients the first. I might plant out 1 or 2, but there's a lot of things in here that I have plenty of, and I really did just sow this for an experiment. So if you want to help support videos like this, please do check out my Patreon below, share it, like it, share it with your friends, share it with your gardening groups, all that kind of stuff, and I would really appreciate it. An extra special thank you to all of my Chili Pepper tier patrons who make these videos possible. Tony, Bill, Pam, Louise, Mel, Michael, Denise, Socks in the Garden, Andrew, Sarah, Angela, Dorcasaur, Louise, Andre, and Brett. Hopefully, I will see you again in the next one.